Alrighty guys, here we go. So our standard is the same and we are still talking about macroeconomics. In particular, our LEQ is the same from last night's video. What four categories of economic activity are used to measure GDP? Now, in last night's video, I introduced the idea of GDP to you. It stands for Gross Domestic Product, and it represents the total value of all final goods and services produced in a nation in a single year. In last night's video, I also gave you the formula for I simply gave you the formula. I did not spend any time explaining it. Well, in tonight's video, we are going to be explaining what all of these letters mean. Consumption, investment, government spending, exports, and imports. So here we go. So let's look at that C right now. Consumption, sometimes called consumer consumption. Now, consumption is the single most powerful component of GDP. In other words, that C part of the equation represents about 65% of all GDP. So consumption is quite simply what you and I buy. Like, it's as simple as that. It represents all spending of a nation's consumers on final goods and services during the year. For example, when we go to the grocery store and buy food, that counts towards GDP. When we go to Walmart and buy clothing, that counts towards GDP. When we buy new cars and new homes, that counts towards GDP. Also, services such as haircuts and doctor visits also count towards GDP. Now, here's the one thing I need you guys to know for this. Basically, everything you and I spend our money on counts towards the consumption component of GDP, so long as it is new and from America. That's an important component. So long as that it is new and from America. All right, let's move on to the I part of the GDP equation. That is business investment. When I say investment, do not confuse it with the purchase of stocks and bonds, which is something we'll be covering in Unit 5. So when I say investment, do not think about buying stocks and bonds. But business investment is the full name of what that I represents. It's the money spent by businesses to acquire goods and services to help maintain the business, aka the factors of production. And business investment represents about 15% of GDP. So consumption and business investment are almost the same thing. The difference is that the business is buying the goods or services. That is, the entrepreneurs behind Jared's Juice Bar, or the corporation, or the franchise, or the sole proprietorship or partnership. They are buying goods and services for their business. Specifically, if I am doing Jared's Juice Bar and I buy new juicers and purchase fancy new computers to make tracking orders more efficiently, even though I may not be buying that with my personal money, now if I were buying these with my personal money, that would count towards consumer consumption, the C. But since I'm buying it in Jared's Juice Bar's name, that counts towards business investment. Now, there's an important note I need to make right here. What I pay my workers does not count towards GDP. And here is why. This is a very important point. Make sure you write this down. Worker salaries are not counted as business investments because if you guys think about it, the money I pay my workers ends up getting spent, right? Like, that just makes sense. For the most part, the money I pay my workers ends up getting spent. So to avoid double counting, wages of workers are not counted because ultimately what I pay my workers, they are simply going to spend, and that is going to get counted under consumption. So please keep that point in mind. Our next component of GDP is government spending, or the G, and that is quite simply what the government spends. So if consumption is what the consumers spend, business investment is what businesses spend, and government spending is what the government spends. Now, here's the tricky part with government spending. Payroll for public employees does count towards government spending, and here is why. Now, this is very tricky. The government is purchasing my service as a teacher. So I'm not necessarily counted as a laborer. They have purchased my service, which is why it counts towards GDP. For example, when you go and get a haircut, you are purchasing the service of getting a haircut. Well, that counts towards GDP. The government is purchasing the service of firemen, policemen, teachers, public service officials, so on and so forth. So that does count towards GDP. In addition, anything owned by the government, such as roads and bridges and national defense systems, also counts towards GDP. That is, if we were to buy a new battleship and all the parts were sourced from America, the final value of that battleship would count towards GDP. Now, here's another important point to make. Social Security, Medicare, and welfare programs are not counted because nothing new is being produced, but rather money is simply being transferred. So if the government generates money through taxes and they transfer money to, let's say, the Social Security Administration or the various welfare programs throughout the nation, that money is not going towards acquiring anything new. It is simply redistributing money that's already out there. So the net value stays the same. So government spending is simply what the government spends its money on. The final component is what most students have the most difficulty with. So this final component is called net exports. Net means the amount after some mathematics has been done. More specifically, net exports is equal to exports minus imports. So exports, X means to get rid of, to send away. M, the IM in imports, that means to bring to us. So here's what exports are. Exports are the total value of all products sold internationally. So think about products that are produced here in America and we sell it to businesses in China. We sell it to businesses and people in Europe. We sell it to people in Africa. That counts as exports, and that counts towards our GDP because, again, GDP measures what was produced in a country, the final dollar value of what was produced in a country in a given year. So if we produce, like let's say GE produces airliner engines, like the big, huge airline turbines found on airplanes or jets, we make those here in America, and if we sell them internationally to, I don't know, an airline company in Germany, that counts towards our GDP because we will not see it again in consumer spending. That is, once that export component or product leaves the nation, I'm not going to be able to buy it because it is purchased by someone or some business internationally. So that's exports, and exports do count towards GDP. Imports do not count directly towards GDP. Imports are the total value of all products produced internationally but sold in America. Think about everything you say that says made in China, made in Mexico. Because imports count towards other countries' GDP, for example, a lot of stuff we buy, especially clothing, is made in China. When that clothing was made in China, that clothing did count towards China's GDP. But once it reaches America on the cargo ships, it is then subtracted out of our GDP because it doesn't count towards our GDP. So here's what I need you guys to know. What you do is you take the total value of exports and simply subtract it from the total value of imports. So if the total value of exports, that is if we sold $3 trillion worth of stuff and we imported $2 trillion worth of stuff, that means our net exports was $1 trillion. Now here's something to note. The USA is infamous for importing a ton of stuff. If you go to Walmart or Kmart, almost everything on the tag says made in China, made in Mexico. So when those products first arrived in America, think about all the ports in Los Angeles and the port of Tampa, port of Jacksonville, so on and so forth. The value of those products was subtracted out of GDP. So it is not uncommon, in fact it is normal, to have net exports be equal to 0% or even a negative amount and hurt GDP because we are importing more than we are exporting. Alright guys, so that is that. That was a crash course overview of the components of GDP. We will be practicing this much more in class. So once again, here is the formula. We have consumer consumption for the C, we have business investment for the I, government spending for the G, and finally this X minus M over here, that represents net exports. More specifically, net exports refers to exports minus imports. More common than not, this ends up equaling 0 or even a negative number because we import more than we export. So there you go, a little bit of mathematics in Mr. Jarrett's class. I hope you guys remember PEMDAS. Have a good evening. I'll see you all later.